Hello, everyone. My name is Tom Cantillon, and I'm the Policy Manager for the London Declaration at BSI. Welcome to this overview video of this Commonwealth Standards Network guidance on climate action for standards development organisations. So this video will provide you with an overview of the content of the guidance, which is available on the Commonwealth Standards Network website. And the aim of this guidance is to really provide some clarity and guiding questions and steps for standards development organisations on how to embed climate action in their standardisation activity. The guidance is really aimed at standards development organisations in the light of the ISO London Declaration, which is a commitment by the international standards community and for the international standards community to align the standards development system with an equitable net zero transition. And the aim of the guidance is that it's for a non-technical audience with just a general understanding of climate science and working within standards development organisations. So the context of this guidance is really about the ISO London Declaration, as I mentioned, which was proposed by BSI at the ISO General Assembly in September 2021. And the London Declaration, as it stands, has three pillars of action. So the first pillar is all around ensuring that climate science is considered and embedded in the development of all new and revised standards and publications. The second pillar is around enhancing the role of civil society in the standards development process. And the third pillar is around producing an action plan and measurement framework, just to ensure that we are accountable in taking action under the London Declaration. And the whole aim, as I mentioned, is that this ensures that international standardization facilitates an equitable net zero transition, because it's trying to ensure that not only is the content of the standards responsive to and facilitating climate adaptation and mitigation, but that the voices of civil society is included in standards development, because the effects of climate impacts are not felt evenly across all in society. Certain stakeholder groups feel climate impacts more, and therefore there's an obligation on us as the standardization community to ensure that their voices are heard and reflected in our standardization activity. So in terms of the guidance, it is split across a number of sections. So first of all, it just provides a general overview about the unique role of standards development organizations in climate action. Then it goes into a little bit more detail around how you can think about embedding climate action in your standardization activity, looking at the life cycle of new work items from the creation of or proposal of new standards through standards development itself, and looking at your stakeholder groups, including standards makers. And then we go into a little bit more detail around specific steps around climate adaptation in standards development, climate mitigation in standards development, civil society in standards development, before concluding. So diving right in, the first section is on the role of standards development organizations in climate action. And this really elaborates how standards development organizations play a unique role in the climate action space through their consensus-based standards development activity, through their ability to foster innovation, potentially in a way faster than regulation can, and by ensuring consistency and compatibility both within and between countries, which can enhance the robustness and the kind of systemic nature of climate action. And this section also goes into some high-level principles for standards development organizations to consider when planning any of their climate action activities in their organization or in their standards development. The second section then really goes into how to embed climate action in standards development more specifically, and it looks at this kind of life cycle approach to standards development to consider how to do this in practice, beginning first with new work item proposals. So this is thinking about how you can consider, justify, and document the climate impacts of any given new standardization activity, whether that be the development of a new standard or the revision of an existing standard, and what structurally can you do to ensure that that is being considered as a matter of course in any new standardization activity. For example, changing the template that is used to propose new work items, or guidance for people assessing the development or the proposal of new work items. Secondly, it goes into some detail and asks some guiding questions around the standards development process itself, just giving you some considerations to think about when it comes to how to develop standards and how to embed climate in the development of standards, thinking about things like creating standing items on committee agendas, providing additional guidance for committee managers or committee members on what climate action in standards looks like in practice, or indeed for those drafting standards to think about standards development in the kind of specific clauses and wording as they're going along in the standards development process. And finally, there's just a little bit in this guidance as well on the standards catalogue and how to conduct an impact assessment of the standards catalogue that's already been published to ensure that anything that is currently on the market is fit for purpose and is responsive to the requirements around climate action, climate adaptation, climate mitigation. And then finally, in this section, there is a part on standards makers themselves, a key stakeholder in this endeavour, and what can be done to ensure that they are equipped with the knowledge, the skills, and the profile to make sure that they are change agents for climate action as well, not just standards development organisations. Because in order to effect systemic change with climate action in standards development, all stakeholders need to play their part, both standards development organisations and standards makers. So this section looks at things like what kind of policies or profiles govern the behaviour of standards makers within a standards development organisation, and what steps can be taken to ensure that climate action is embedded in the roles and responsibilities of standards makers themselves. The next section then looks at climate adaptation specifically in standards development. So climate adaptation is looking at how you can adapt a system, process, product to ensure that it is responsive to a range of climate impact scenarios, for example, increased severity and intensity of extreme weather events such as drought, flood, etc. So again, this section looks at some high-level principles for you to consider as a standards development organisation when thinking about embedding climate adaptation in standards development. And then it goes on to various frameworks for assessing the necessity of embedding climate adaptation in standards development, looking at things like a precautionary or risk-based approach, or a life cycle approach, or a systemic approach to assess the materiality and the necessity of the need to embed climate adaptation in various parts of standards development. And then finally, this section goes into some discrete areas of where adaptation measures can be implemented in climate adaptation from a life cycle perspective. So looking at the full life cycle of different standards types, from supply chain to manufacturing to end-of-life disposal, recycling, etc. So the aim with this is to give you a sense of the range of options available to you as a standards development organisation to embed climate adaptation in standards development. Similarly, on the mitigation side, there are some guiding questions and guidance for you in this report and guidance around how to do it. Again, there's a section on choosing an evaluation method, so how you would evaluate the need for mitigation in standards development and how to quantify the impacts. That we have some standards in existence already that can help you do that. And this just kind of spells that out a little bit more before talking about the mitigation hierarchy and the preferred approach for implementing mitigation strategies in standards development. You can see the mitigation hierarchy there on the right. And we should be working from top to bottom when it comes to prioritizing actions in standards development around mitigation. So, prioritizing actions that avoid the emission of greenhouse gases altogether, followed by actions that reduce the amount of gases associated or emitted with a given process or product. Thinking about substitution, so whether more efficient fuels can be substituted into the content of a standard in order to mitigate its climate impact. And then finally, where relevant, thinking about compensation, so thinking about where nature-based solutions and/or offsets can be used to further mitigate the impact of a given standard on the climate. Finally, then, the guidance concludes with an overview of some approaches you can take to think about civil society and standards development. It goes into a little bit more detail around why civil society is particularly important in a climate context to think about when you're thinking about climate action through standards. and gives you a general overview of an approach to enhance how civil society is kind of embedded in and considered in standards development, looking at things like how to conduct a stakeholder mapping, how to establish a network of civil society organizations, and indeed the importance of establishing such a network with civil society organizations, and how to build capacity within your committees who are developing standards, capacity both in terms of representation by and for civil society organizations on the committee itself, but also capacity within the committee to recognize and respond to identified gaps in representation in a committee and proactively seek out members and membership that allows those gaps to be filled and therefore allows for more responsive and reflective standards to be developed and therefore more sustainable standards. And then finally, there's a little bit in the guidance on thinking about differing forms of participation in standards development beyond just committee participation or public comment, just some suggestions about how you as a standards development organization can test and trial alternate forms to gather input and views into standardization activity so that those who require differing ways of participating in standardization are catered for, as oftentimes it is those groups who are least able to participate in the given system that are most in need of their views being reflected because they are most vulnerable to climate impacts such as heat stress, drought, extreme weather impacts, etc. So hopefully that has given you a general overview about what this guidance entails. We're hoping with this that this is kind of a living document. So if you do have any feedback once you've read the guidance, which is available on the Commonwealth Standards Network, then please feel free to reach out to me at tom.cantillon@bsigroup.com. And if you have any general comments or questions around the Commonwealth Standards Network, then please reach out to Ben Headley at ben.headley@bsigroup.com. But with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you find the guidance useful. Thank you very much.